Chapter 2, Section 2, Subsection 1. The Child in Assyria. The original of that mother so widely worshipped, there is reason to believe, was Semiramis, already referred to, who it is well known was worshipped by the Babylonians and other eastern nations, and that under the name of Rhea, the great goddess mother. It was from the sun, however, that she derived all her glory and her claims to deification. That son, though represented as a child in his mother's arms, was a person of great stature and immense bodily powers, as well as most fascinating manners. In scripture he is referred to, Ezekiel 8:14, under the name of Tammuz, but he is commonly known among classical writers under the name of Bacchus, that is, the lamented one. From Baka, to weep or lament. Among the Phoenicians, says Hesychius, Bacchus means weeping. As the woman wept for Tammuz, so did they for Bacchus. To the ordinary reader, the name of Bacchus suggests nothing more than revelry and drunkenness, but it is now well known that amid all the abominations that attended his orgies, their grand design was professedly the purification of souls, and that from the guilt and defilement of sin. This lamented one, exhibited and adored as a little child in his mother's arms, seems in point of fact to have been the husband of Semiramis, whose name Ninos, by which he is commonly known in classical history, literally signified the sun. As Semiramis, the wife was worshipped as Rhea, whose grand distinguishing character was that of the great goddess mother. The conjunction with her of her husband under the name of Ninos, or the sun, was sufficient to originate the peculiar worship of the mother and son, so extensively diffused among the nations of antiquity, and this no doubt is the explanation of the fact which has so much puzzled the inquirers into ancient history, that Ninos is sometimes called the husband and sometimes the son of Semiramis. As such, Rhea was called by the Greeks Amas. Amas is evidently the Greek form of the Chaldea Amma, mother. This also accounts for the origin of the very same confusion of relationship between Isis and Osiris, the mother and child of the Egyptians, for as Bunsen shows, Osiris was represented in Egypt as at once the son and husband of his mother, and actually bore as one of his titles of dignity and honor the name husband of the mother. This still further casts light on the fact already noticed, that the Indian god Isvara is represented as a babe at the breasts of his own wife Isi, or Parvati. Bunsen. It may be observed that this very name, husband of the mother, given to Osiris, seems even at this day to be in common use among ourselves, although there is not the least suspicion of the meaning of the term, or whence it has come. Herodotus mentions that when in Egypt he was astonished to hear the very same mournful but ravishing song of Linos, sung by the Egyptians, although under another name, which he had been accustomed to hear in his own native land of Greece. Linos was the same god as the Bacchus of Greece, or Osiris of Egypt, for Homer introduces a boy singing the song of Linos while the vintage is going on, Elias, and the scholiast says that this song was sung in memory of Linos, who was torn in pieces by dogs. The epithet dogs applied to those who tore Linos in pieces is evidently used in a mystical sense, and it will afterwards be seen how thoroughly the other name by which he is known, Narcissus, identifies him with the Greek Bacchus and Egyptian Osiris. In some places in Egypt, for the song of Linos or Osiris, a peculiar melody seems to have been used. Savary says that in the temple of Abydos the priest repeated the 7 vowels in the form of hymns, and the musicians were forbid to enter it. Letters. Strabo, whom Savary refers to, calls the god of that temple Memnon, but we learn from Wilkinson that Osiris was the great god of Abydos, whence it is evident that Memnon and Osiris were only different names of the same divinity. Now the name of Linos or Osiris, as the husband of his mother in Egypt, was Kamut, Bunsen. When Gregory the Great introduced into the Church of Rome what are now called the Gregorian chants, he got them from the Chaldean mysteries, which had long been established in Rome, for the Roman Catholic priest Eustace admits that these chants were largely composed of Lydian and Phrygian tunes, classical tour. Lydia and Phrygia being among the chief seats in later times of those mysteries of which the Egyptian mysteries were only a branch. These tunes were sacred, the music of the great god, and in introducing them Gregory introduced the music of Kamut, and thus to all appearance has it come to pass that the name of Osiris or Kamut, the husband of the mother, is in everyday use among ourselves as the name of the musical scale. For what is the melody of Osiris, consisting of the 7 vowels, formed into a hymn, but the Gamut? Now this Ninus or son, born in the arms of the Babylonian Madonna, is so described as very clearly to identify him with Nimrod, Ninus, king of the Assyrians, says Trogus Pompeius, epitomized by Justin. First of all, change the contented moderation of the ancient manners, incited by a new passion to desire of conquest. He was the first who carried on war against his neighbors, and he conquered all nations from Assyria to Libya, as they were yet unacquainted with the arts of war. The name Assyrians, as has already been noticed, has a wide latitude of meaning among the classic authors, taking in the Babylonians as well as the Assyrians proper. This account points directly to Nimrod and can apply to no other. The account of Diodorus Siculus entirely agrees with it and adds another trait that goes still further to determine the identity. That account is as follows. Ninus, the most ancient of the Assyrian kings mentioned in history, performed great actions. Being naturally of a warlike disposition and ambitious of glory that results from valor, he armed a considerable number of young men that were brave and vigorous like himself, trained them up a long time in laborious exercises and hardships, and by that means accustomed them to bear the fatigues of war and to face dangers with intrepidity. As Diodorus makes Ninus the most ancient of the Assyrian kings, and represents him as beginning those wars which raised his power to an extraordinary height by bringing the people of Babylonia under subjection to him, while as yet the city of Babylon was not in existence. This shows that he occupied the very position of Nimrod, of whom the scriptural account is that he first began to be mighty on the earth, and that the beginning of his kingdom was Babylon. As the Babel builders, when their speech was confounded, were scattered abroad on the face of the earth, and therefore deserted both the city and the tower which they had commenced to build, Babylon as a city could not properly be said to exist until Nimrod, by establishing his power there, made it the foundation and starting point of his greatness. In this respect, then, the story of Ninus and of Nimrod exactly harmonize. The way, too, in which Ninus gained his power is the very way in which Nimrod erected his. There can be no doubt that it was by inuring his followers to the toils and dangers of the chase that gradually formed them to the use of arms, and so prepared them for aiding him in establishing his dominions, just as Ninus, by training his companions for a long time in laborious exercises and hardships, qualified them for making him the first of the Assyrian kings. The conclusions deduced from these testimonies of ancient history are greatly strengthened by many additional considerations. In Genesis 10:11 we find a passage which, when its meaning is properly understood, casts a very steady light on the subject. That passage, as given in the Authorized Version, runs thus: "Out of that land went forth Ashur, and builded Nineveh." This speaks of it as something remarkable, that Ashur went out of the land of Shinar, while yet the human race in general went forth from the same land. It goes upon the supposition that Ashur had some sort of divine right to that land, and that he had been in a manner expelled from it by Nimrod, while no divine right is elsewhere hinted at in the context, or seems capable of proof. Moreover, it represents Ashur as setting up in the immediate neighborhood of Nimrod as mighty a kingdom as Nimrod himself. Ashur building 4 cities, one of which is emphatically said to have been great, while Nimrod, on this interpretation, built just the same number of cities, of which none is specially characterized as great. Now it is in the last degree improbable that Nimrod would have quietly borne so mighty a rival so near him. To obviate such difficulties as these, it has been proposed to render the words, "Out of that land he, Nimrod, went forth into Assur or Assyria." But then, according to ordinary usage of grammar, the word in the original should have been Ashura, with a sign of motion to a place affixed to it, whereas it is simply Ashur, without any such sign of motion affixed. I am persuaded that the whole perplexity that commentators have hitherto felt in considering this passage has arisen from supposing that there is a proper name in the passage, where in reality no proper name exists. Ashur is the passive participle of a verb, which in its Chaldee sense signifies to make strong, and consequently signifies being strengthened or made strong. Read thus, the whole passage is natural and easy. And the beginning of his Nimrod's kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh. A beginning naturally implies something to succeed, and here we find it, verse 11, out of that land he went forth, being made strong, or when he had been made strong, Ashur, and builded Nineveh. Now this exactly agrees with the statement in the ancient history of Justin. Ninus strengthened the greatness of his acquired dominion by continued possession, having subdued therefore his neighbors, when by an accession of forces being still further strengthened, he went forth against other tribes, and every new victory paved the way for another. He subdued all the peoples of the east. Thus then Nimrod or Ninus was the builder of Nineveh, and the origin of the name of that city as the habitation of Ninus is accounted for, and light is thereby at the same time cast on the fact that the name of the chief part of the ruins of Nineveh is Nimrod at this day. Nineveh, the habitation of Ninus. Now assuming that Ninus is Nimrod, the way in which that assumption explains what is otherwise inexplicable in the statements of ancient history greatly confirms the truth of that assumption itself. Ninus is said to have been the son of Belus or Baal, and Baal is said to have been the founder of Babylon. If Ninus was in reality the first king of Babylon, how could Belus or Baal, his father, be said to be the founder of it? Both might very well be, as will appear if we consider who was Baal, and what we can trace of his doings. If Ninus was Nimrod, who was the historical Baal? He must have been Cush, for Cush begat Nimrod, Genesis 10:8, and Cush is generally represented as having been a ringleader in the great apostasy. But again, Cush as the son of Ham was Hermes or Mercury, for Hermes is just an Egyptian synonym for the son of Ham. See Gregorius Turonensis De Rerum Franc. Gregory attributes to Cush what was said more generally to have befallen his sons, but this statement shows the belief in his day, which is amply confirmed from other sources, that Cush had a preeminent share in leading mankind away from the true worship of God. The composition of Hermes is first from Hel, which is Chaldee, is synonymous with Ham or Chem, or the burnt one, as Hel also, like Ham, signified the hot or burning one. This name formed the foundation for covertly identifying Ham with the sun, and so deifying the great patriarch, after whose name the land of Egypt was called, in connection with the sun. Chem or Ham in his own name was openly worshipped in late ages in the land of Ham, but this would have been too daring at first. By means of Hel, the synonym, however, the way was paved for this. Her is the name of Horus, who is identified with the sun, Bunsen, which shows the real etymology of the name to be from the verb to which I have traced it. Then secondly, Mes is from Meshech, or without the last radical, which is omissible, mesh, to draw forth. In Egyptian we have ms, in the sense of to bring forth, which is evidently a different form of the same word. In the passive sense also we find ms used, Bunsen vocabulary. The radical meaning of Meshech in Stocki lexicon is given in Latin extraxit, and our English word extraction, as applied to birth or descent, shows that there is a connection between the generic meaning of this word and birth. This derivation will be found to explain the meaning of the names of the Egyptian kings, Rameses and Thotmes, the former evidently being the son of Ra or the sun, the latter in like manner being the son of Thoth. For the very same reason, Hermes is the son of Hel, or Ham, the burnt one, that is, Cush. Now Hermes was the great original prophet of idolatry, for he was recognized by the pagans as the author of their religious rites and the interpreter of the gods. The distinguished Gesenius identifies him with the Babylonian Nebo, as the prophetic god, and statement of Hyginus shows that he was known as the grand agent in that movement which produced the division of tongues. His words are these: "For many ages men lived under the government of Jove," evidently not the Roman Jupiter, but the Jehovah of the Hebrews, "without cities and without laws, and all speaking one language. But after that Mercury interpreted the speeches of men," whence an interpreter is called hermeneutes or hermeneutics, "the same individual distributed the nations. Then discord began." Here there is a manifest enigma. How could Mercury or Hermes have any need to interpret the speeches of mankind when they all spake one language? To find out the meaning of this, we must go to the language of the mysteries. Peresh in Chaldee signifies to interpret, but was pronounced by old Egyptians and by Greeks, and often by the Chaldees themselves in the same way as Peres, to divide. Mercury then, or Hermes, or Cush, the son of Ham, was the divider of the speeches of men. He, it would seem, had been the ringleader in the scheme for building the great city and tower of Babel, and as the well-known title of Hermes, the interpreter of the gods, would indicate, had encouraged them in the name of God to proceed in their presumptuous enterprise, and so had caused the language of men to be divided and themselves to be scattered abroad on the face of the earth. Now look at the name of Belus or Bel, given to the father of Ninus or Nimrod in connection with this. While the Greek name Belus represented both the Baal and Bel of the Chaldees, these were nevertheless two entirely distinct titles. These titles were both alike often given to the same god, but they had totally different meanings. Baal, as we have already seen, signified the Lord, but Bel signified the confounder. When then we read that Belus, the father of Ninus, was he that built or founded Babylon, can there be a doubt in what sense it was that the title of Belus was given to him? It must have been in the sense of Baal, the confounder. And to this meaning of the name of the Babylonian Baal, there is a very distinct allusion in Jeremiah 1:2, where it is said, "Baal is confounded," that is, the confounder is brought to confusion. That Cush was known to pagan antiquity under the very character of Baal, the confounder, a statement of Ovid very clearly proves. The statement to which I refer is that in which Janus, the god of gods, from whom all the other gods had their origin, is made to say of himself, "The ancients called me Chaos." Janus was also called in the most ancient hymns of the Salii, Makrob, Saturn. Now first, this decisively shows that chaos was known not merely as a state of confusion, but as the god of confusion. But secondly, who that is at all acquainted with the laws of Chaldaic pronunciation does not know that chaos is just one of the established forms of the name of Chus or Cush? Then look at the symbol of Janus, whom the ancients called Chaos, and it will be seen how exactly it tallies with the doings of Cush when he is identified with Baal the confounder. That symbol is a club, and the name of a club in Chaldee comes from the very word which signifies to break in pieces or scatter abroad. Then here are some more footnotes. The name of Cush is also Chus, for sh frequently passes in Chaldee into s, and Chus in pronunciation legitimately becomes Chavos, or without the digamma, Chaos. The digamma is the W. From Sir William Betham's Etruscan Literature and Antiquities Investigated, 1842, the Etruscan name on the reverse of the medal Belatri, Lord of Spies, is probably given to Janus in allusion to his well-known title Janus Tuens, which may be rendered Janus the Seer or the All-Seeing Janus. In Proverbs 25:18, a mole or club is Mephaites. In Jeremiah 51:20, the same word without the yud is evidently used for a club, though in our version it is rendered battle axe. For the use of it is not to cut asunder, but to break in pieces. See the whole passage. He who caused the confusion of tongues was he who broke the previously united earth, Genesis 11:1, in pieces and scattered the fragments abroad. How significant then as a symbol is the club, as commemorating the work of Cush, as Baal the confounder. And that significance will be all the more apparent when the reader turns to the Hebrew of Genesis 11:9 and finds that the very word from which a club derives its name is that which is employed when it is said that in consequence of the confusion of tongues the children of men were scattered abroad on the face of all the earth. The word there used for scattering abroad is hephaites, which in the Greek form becomes hephaist, and hence the origin of the well-known but little understood name of Hephaestus, as applied to Vulcan, the father of the gods. There are many instances of similar change. Thus Botra becomes in Greek Bostra, and Mitzrayim Mesdraim. Vulcan in the classical pantheon had not commonly so high a place, but in Egypt Hephaestus or Vulcan was called father of the gods, Ammianus Marcellinus. Hephaestus is the name of the ringleader in the first rebellion, as the scatterer abroad, as Baal is the name of the same individual as the confounder of tongues. Here then the reader may see the real origin of Vulcan's hammer, which is just another name for the club of Janus or Chaos, the god of confusion. And to this, as breaking the earth in pieces, there is a covert allusion in Jeremiah 1:23, where Babylon, as identified with its primeval god, is thus apostrophized. How is the hammer of the whole earth cut asunder and broken? Now as the tower building was the first act of open rebellion after the flood, and Cush as Baal was the ringleader in it, he was of course the first to whom the name Merodach, the great rebel, must have been given, and therefore, according to the usual parallelism of the prophetic language, we find both names of the Babylonian god referred to together, when the judgment on Babylon is predicted. Baal is confounded, Merodach is broken in pieces. Jeremiah 1:2. Merodach comes from mered, to rebel, and dach, the demonstrative pronoun affixed, which makes it emphatic, signifying that, or the great. The judgment comes upon the Babylonian god according to what he had done. As Baal he had confounded the whole earth, therefore he is confounded. As Merodach, by the rebellion he had stirred up, he had broken the united world in pieces, therefore he himself is broken in pieces. So much for the historical character of Baal, as identified with Janus or Chaos, the god of confusion, with his symbolical club, or battle axe. While the names Baal and Hephaestus had the origin above referred to, they were not inappropriate names also, though in a different sense, for the war gods descending from Cush, from whom Babylon derived its glory among the nations, the warlike deified kings of the line of Cush, glorified in their power to carry confusion among their enemies, to scatter their armies and to break the earth in pieces by their resistless power. To this, no doubt, as well as to the acts of the primeval Baal, there is allusion in the inspired denunciations of Jeremiah on Babylon. The physical sense also of these names was embodied in the club given to the Grecian Hercules, the very club of Janus, when in a character quite different from that of the original Hercules, he was set up as the great reformer of the world by mere physical force. When two-headed Janus with a club is represented, the twofold representation was probably intended to represent old Cush and young Cush or Nimrod as combined. By the twofold representation with other attributes had reference also to another father of the gods, afterwards to be noticed, who had especially to do with water. Proceeding then on these deductions, it is not difficult to see how it might be said that Baal or Belus, the father of Ninus, founded Babylon, while nevertheless Ninus or Nimrod was properly the builder of it. Now, though Baal or Cush, as being specially concerned in laying the first foundations of Babylon, might be looked upon as the first king, as in some of the copies of Eusebius' Chronicle he is represented, yet it is evident, from both sacred history and profane, that he could never have reigned as king of the Babylonian monarchy, properly so called, and accordingly in the Armenian version of the Chronicle of Eusebius, which bears the undisputed palm for correctness and authority, his name is entirely omitted in the list of Assyrian kings, and that of Ninus stands first, in such terms as exactly correspond with the scriptural account of Nimrod. Thus then, looking at the fact that Ninus is currently made by antiquity the son of Belus or Baal, when we have seen that the historical Baal is Cush, the identity of Ninus and Nimrod is still further confirmed. But when we look at what is said of Semiramis, the wife of Ninus, the evidence receives an additional development. That evidence goes conclusively to show that the wife of Ninus could be none other than the wife of Nimrod. and further to bring out one of the great characters in which Nimrod, when deified, was adored. In Daniel 11:38 we read of the god called Allah Mahozine, the god of fortifications. In our version, Allah Mahozim is rendered alternatively God of forces or God's protectors. To the latter interpretation there is this insuperable objection that Allah is in the singular. Neither can the former be admitted, for Mahozim or Mautzim does not signify forces or armies but munitions, as it is also given in the margin, that is, fortifications. Stockius in his lexicon gives us the definition of Mahoz in the singular, Rober arx locus munitus, and in proof of the definition the following examples. Judges 6:26, and build an altar to the Lord their God upon the top of this rock. Mahoz in the margin, strong place. And Daniel 11:19, then shall he turn his face to the fore, Mahoz, of his own land. Who this god of fortifications could be, commentators have found themselves at a loss to determine. In the records of antiquity, the existence of any god of fortifications has been commonly overlooked, and it must be confessed that no such god stands forth there with any prominence to the ordinary reader. But of the existence of a goddess of fortifications, everyone knows that there is the amplest evidence. That goddess is Cybele, who is universally represented with a mural or turreted crown over the fortification on her head. Why was Rhea or Cybele thus represented? Ovid asks the question and answers it himself, and the answer is this. The reason, he says, why the statue of Cybele wore a crown of towers was because she first erected them in cities. The first city in the world after the flood, from whence the commencement of the world itself was often dated, that had towers and encompassing walls, was Babylon. And Ovid himself tells us that it was Semiramis, the first queen of that city, who was believed to have surrounded Babylon with a wall of brick. Semiramis, then, the first deified queen of that city and tower whose top was intended to reach to heaven, must have been the prototype of the goddess who first made towers in cities. When we look at the Ephesian Diana, we find evidence to the very same effect. In general, Diana was depicted as a virgin and the patroness of virginity, but the Ephesian Diana was quite different. She was represented with all the attributes of the mother of the gods, and as the mother of the gods she wore a turreted crown, such as no one can contemplate without being forcibly reminded of the Tower of Babel. Now this tower-bearing Diana is by an ancient scholiast expressly identified with Semiramis. A scholiast on the periergesis of Dionysus, says Layard, Nineveh and its remains, makes Semiramis the same as the goddess Artemis or Despoina. Now Artemis was Diana, and the title of Despoina given to her shows that it was in the character of the Ephesian Diana she was identified with Semiramis, for Despoina is the Greek for Domina, the lady, the peculiar title of Rhea or Cybele, the tower-bearing goddess in ancient Rome. When therefore we remember that Rhea or Cybele, the tower-bearing goddess, was in point of fact a Babylonian goddess, and that Semiramis, when deified, was worshipped under the name of Rhea, there will remain, I think, no doubt as to the personal identity of the goddess of fortifications. Now there is no reason to believe that Semiramis alone, though some have represented the matter so, built the battlements of Babylon. We have the express testimony of the ancient historians, Megasthenes, as preserved by Abidinus, that it was Belus who surrounded Babylon with a wall. As Baal, the confounder who began the city and Tower of Babel, had to leave both unfinished, this could not refer to him. It could refer only to his son, Ninus, who inherited his father's title and who was the first actual king of the Babylonian Empire and consequently Nimrod. The real reason that Semiramis, the wife of Ninus, gained the glory of finishing the fortifications of Babylon was that she came in the esteem of the ancient idolaters to hold a preponderating position and to have attributed to her all the different characters that belonged or were supposed to belong to her husband. Having ascertained, then, one of the characters in which the deified wife was worshipped, we may from that conclude what was the corresponding character of the deified husband. Layard distinctly indicates his belief that Rhea or Cybele, the tower-crowned goddess, was just the female counterpart of the deity presiding over bulwarks or fortresses, and that this deity was Ninus or Nimrod. We have still further evidence from what the scattered notices of antiquity say of the first deified king of Babylon, under a name that identifies him as the husband of Rhea, the tower-bearing goddess. That name is Kronos or Saturn. In the Greek mythology, Kronos and Rhea are commonly brother and sister. Ninus and Semiramis, according to history, are not represented as standing in any such relation to another, but this is no objection to the real identity of Ninus and Kronos. For first, the relationships of the divinities in most countries are peculiarly conflicting. Osiris in Egypt is represented at different times, not only as the son and husband of Isis, but also as her father and brother, Bunsen. Then secondly, whatever the deified mortals might be before deification, on being deified they become into new relationships. On the apotheosis of husband and wife, it was necessary for the dignity of both that both alike should be represented as of the same celestial origin, as both supernaturally the children of God. Before the flood, the great sin that brought ruin on the human race was that the sons of God married others than the daughters of God. In other words, those who were not spiritually their sisters. Genesis 6, verse 2 and 3. In the New World, while the influence of Noah prevailed, the opposite practice must have been strongly inculcated. For a son of God to marry anyone but a daughter of God, or his own sister in the faith, must have been a misalliance and a disgrace. Hence, from a perversion of a spiritual idea, came doubtless the notion of the dignity and purity of the royal line being preserved the more intact, through the marriage of royal brothers and sisters. This was the case in Peru, Prescott, in India, Hardy, and in Egypt, Wilkinson. Hence the relation of Jupiter to Juno, who glorified that she was soro et conjux, sister and wife of her husband. Hence the same relation between Isis and her husband Osiris, the former of whom is represented as lamenting her brother Osiris, Bunsen. For the same reason, no doubt, was Rhea made the sister of her husband Kronos, to show her divine dignity and equality. It is well known that Kronos or Saturn was Rhea's husband, but it is not so well known who was Kronos himself. Traced back to his original, that divinity is proved to have been the first king of Babylon. Theophilus of Antioch shows that Kronos in the east was worshipped under the names of Bel and Baal. And from Eusebius we learn that the first of the Assyrian kings, whose name was Belus, was also by the Assyrians called Kronos. As the genuine copies of Eusebius do not admit of any Belus as an actual king of Assyria prior to Ninus, king of the Babylonians, and distinct from him, that shows that Ninus, the first king of Babylon, was Kronos. But further we find that Kronos was king of the Cyclops, who were his brethren and who derived that name from him, and that the Cyclops were known as the inventors of tower building. Scholiasts upon Euripides, Orest says that the Cyclops were so called from Cyclops their king. By this scholiast the Cyclops are regarded as a Thracian nation, for the Thracians had localized the tradition and applied it to themselves. But the following statement of the scholiast on the Prometheus of Aeschylus shows that they stood in such a relation to Kronos as proof that he was their king. The Cyclops were the brethren of Kronos, the father of Jupiter. The king of the Cyclops, the inventors of tower building, occupied a position exactly corresponding to that of Rhea, who first erected towers in cities. If therefore Rhea, the wife of Kronos, was the goddess of fortifications, Kronos or Saturn, the husband of Rhea, that is Ninus or Nimrod, the first king of Babylon, must have been Allah Mahozin, the god of fortifications. See the note below. The name Kronos itself goes not a little to confirm the argument. Kronos signifies the horned one. Keren means kranim means horn in Hebrew. As a horn is a well-known oriental emblem for power or might, Kronos, the horned one, was according to the mystic system just a synonym for the scriptural epithet applied to Nimrod. He began to be mighty on the earth. The name Kronos, as the classical reader is well aware, is applied to Saturn as the father of the gods. We have already had another father of the gods brought under our notice, even Cush in his character of Baal the confounder and Hephaestus the scatterer abroad, and it is easy to understand how, when the deification of mortals began, and the mighty son of Cush was deified, the father, especially considering the part which he seems to have had in concocting the whole idolatrous system, would have to be deified too, and of course in his character as the father of the Mighty One, and of all the immortals that succeeded him. But in point of fact we shall find in the course of our inquiry that Nimrod was the actual father of the gods, as being the first of deified mortals, and that therefore it is in exact accordance with historical fact that Kronos, the Horned or Mighty One, is in the classic pantheon known by that title. The meaning of his name, Kronos, the Horned One, as applied to Nimrod, fully explains the origin of the remarkable symbol so frequently occurring among the Nineveh sculptures, the gigantic horned man-bull, as representing the great divinities in Assyria. The same word that signified a bull signified also a ruler or a prince. The name for a bull or ruler is in Hebrew without points Shol. In Chaldean it becomes Tur. From Tur in the sense of a bull becomes the Latin Taurus, and from the same word in the sense of a ruler Tyrannus, which originally had no evil meaning. Thus in these well-known classical words we have evidence of the operation of the very principle which caused the deified Assyrian kings to be represented under the form of the man-bull. Hence the horned bull signifies the mighty prince, thereby pointing back to the first of those mighty ones who under the name of Guebres, Gabres or Kabiri occupied presented as wearing horns, and why he was frequently addressed by the epithet bull-horned, as one of the high titles of his dignity. Even in comparatively recent times, Togrul Beg, the leader of the Seljuk Turks, who came from the neighborhood of the Euphrates, was in a similar manner represented with 3 horns growing out of his head as the emblem of his sovereignty. This also in a remarkable way accounts for the origin of one of the divinities worshipped by our pagan Anglo-Saxon ancestors under the name of Zerne-Bogus. This Zerne-Bogus was the black, malevolent, ill-omened divinity. In other words, the exact counterpart of the popular idea of the devil, as supposed to be black and equipped with horns and hoofs. This name analyzed casts a very singular light on the source from whence has come the popular superstition in regard to the grand adversary. The name Zerne-Bogus is almost pure Chaldee, and seems to unfold itself as denoting the seed of the prophet Cush. In Hebrew, Zerah means seed, like Sarah, the promised seed wife of Abraham, where his seed would come from. Nebo or Nabi is a prophet, Nabi, and even in Babylonian is Nabu, and Gus might be Cush. Yeah. We have seen reason already to conclude that under the name Bel, as distinguished from Baal, Cush was the great soothsayer or false prophet worshipped at Babylon. But independent inquirers have been led to the conclusion that Baal and Nebo were just 2 different titles for the same god, and that a prophetic god. Thus does Kitzo comment on the words of Isaiah 46:1. Baal boweth down, Nebo stoopeth, which, with reference to the latter name, the word seems to come from Nibba, to deliver an oracle or to prophesy, and hence would mean an oracle, and may thus, as Karl Metz suggests, commentaire littéral, be no more than another name for Baal himself or a characterizing epithet applied to him. It being not unusual to repeat the same thing in the same verse in equivalent terms, Zerne-Bogus, the great seed of the prophet Cush, was of course Nimrod, for Cush was Nimrod's father. Turn now to Layard and see how this land of ours and Assyria are thus brought into intimate connection. In a woodcut, first we find the Assyrian Hercules, that is Nimrod the giant, as he is called in the Septuagint version of Genesis, without club, spear, or weapons of any kind, attacking a bull. Having overcome the bull, he sets the horns on his head as a trophy of victory and symbol of power, and thenceforth the hero is represented not only with the horns and hoofs above, but from the middle downwards, with the legs and cloven feet of the bull. Thus equipped, he is represented as turning next to encounter a lion. This, in all likelihood, is intended to commemorate some event in the life of him who first began to be mighty in the chase and in war, and who, according to all ancient traditions, was remarkable also for bodily power, as being the leader of the giants that rebelled against heaven. Now Nimrod, as the son of Cush, was black, in other words, was a Negro. Can the Ethiopian change his skin? Is in the original, can the Cushite do so? Keeping this in mind, it will be seen that in that figure, disentombed from Nineveh, we have both the prototype of the Anglo-Saxon Zer-Nebogus, the seed of the prophet Cush, and the real original of the black adversary of mankind with horns and hoofs. It was in a different character from that of the adversary that Nimrod was originally worshipped, but among a people of a fair complexion, as the Anglo-Saxons, it was inevitable that if worshipped at all, it must generally be simply as an object of fear, and so Kronos, the horned one who wore the horns, as the emblem both of his physical might and sovereign power, has come to be in popular superstition the recognized representative of the devil. In many and far severed countries, horns became the symbol of sovereign power. The corona or crown that still encircles the brows of European monarchs seems remotely to be derived from the emblem of might adopted by Kronos or Saturn, who, according to Pherecydes, was the first before all others that ever wore a crown. The first regal crown appears to have been only a band in which the horns were set. From the idea of power contained in the horn, even subordinate rulers seem to have worn a circlet adorned with a single horn, in token of their derived authority. Bruce, the Abyssinian traveller, gives examples of Abyssinian chiefs thus decorated, in regard to whom he states that the horn attracted his particular attention when he perceived that the governors of provinces were distinguished by this head-dress. In the case of sovereign powers, the royal headband was adorned sometimes with a double, sometimes a triple crown. The double horn had evidently been the original symbol of power or might on the part of sovereigns, for on the Egyptian monuments the heads of the deified royal personages have generally no more than the two horns to shadow forth their power. As sovereignty in Nimrod's case was founded on physical force, so the two horns of the bull were the symbols of that physical force. And in accordance with this we read in Sanchuniathon that Astarte put on her own head a bull's head as the ensign of royalty. By and by, however, another and a higher idea came in, and the expression of that idea was seen in the symbol of the three horns. A cap seems in course of time to have come to be associated with the regal horns. In Assyria, the three-horned cap was one of the sacred emblems, in token that the power connected with it was of celestial origin, the three horns evidently pointing at the power of the Trinity. Still, we have indications that the horned band without any cap was anciently the corona or royal crown. The crown borne by the Hindu god Vishnu in his avatar of the fish is just an open circle or band, with three horns standing erect from it, with a knob on the top of each horn. All the avatars are represented as crowned with a crown that seems to have been modeled from this, consisting of a coronet with 3 points, standing erect from it, in which Sir William Jones recognizes the Ethiopian or Parthian coronet. The open tiara of Agni, the Hindu god of fire, shows in its lower round the double horn, made in the very same way as in Assyria, proving at once the ancient custom, and whence that custom had come. Instead of the three horns, three horn-shaped leaves come to be substituted, and thus the horned band gradually passed into the modern coronet or crown with the 3 leaves of the fleur-de-lis, or other familiar 3-leaved adornings. Among the Red Indians of America there had evidently been something entirely analogous to the Babylonian custom of wearing the horns, for in the buffalo dance there each of the dancers had his head arrayed with buffalo horns, and it is worthy of especial remark that the satyric dance, or dance of the satyrs in Greece, seems to have been the counterpart of this Red Indian solemnity, for the satyrs were horned divinities, and consequently those who imitated their dance must have had their heads set off in imitation of theirs. Bryant. The satyrs were the companions of Bacchus and danced along with him. When it is considered who Bacchus was and that his distinguishing epithet was bull-horned, the horns of the satyrs will appear in their true light. For a particular mystic reason, the satyr's horn was commonly a goat's horn, but originally must have been the same as Bacchus. When thus we find a custom that is clearly founded on a form of speech that characteristically distinguished the region where Nimrod's power was wielded, used in so many different countries far removed from one another, where no such form of speech was used in ordinary life, we may be sure that such a custom was not the result of mere accident, but that it indicates the widespread diffusion of an influence that went forth in all directions from Babylon, from the time that Nimrod first began to be mighty on the earth. There was another way in which Nimrod's power was symbolized beside by the horn. A synonym for Gebel, the mighty one, was Abil, while Abel also signified a wing. Nimrod, as head and captain of those men of war by whom he surrounded himself, and who were the instruments of establishing his power, was Baal Abirin, the lord of the mighty ones. But Baal Abirin, pronounced nearly in the same way, signified the winged one, and therefore in symbol he was represented not only as a horned bull, but as at once a horned and winged bull, as showing not merely that he was mighty himself, but that he had mighty ones under his command, who were ever ready to carry his will into effect, and to put down all opposition to his power, and to shadow forth the vast extent of his might. He was represented with great and wide expanding wings. This is according to a peculiar Oriental idiom, of which there are many examples. Thus Baal Af, Lord of Wrath, signifies an angry man. Baal Lashon, Lord of Tongue, an eloquent man. Baal Chatzim, Lord of Arrows, is an archer. And in like manner, Baal Aberin, Lord of Wings, signifies a winged one. To this mode of representing the mighty kings of Babylon and Assyria, who imitated Nimrod and his successors, there is manifest allusion in Isaiah 8, verse 6-8. Forasmuch as this people refuses the waters of Shiloah that go softly, and rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah's son, now therefore, behold, the Lord bringeth upon them the waters of the river, strong and mighty, even the king of Assyria, and all his glory, and he shall come up over all his banks. And he shall pass through Judah, he shall overflow and go over. He shall reach even unto the neck, and the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of thy land, O Emmanuel. When we look at such figures with their great extent of expanded wing, as symbolizing an Assyrian king, what a vividness and force does it give to the inspired language of the prophet! And how clear is it also that the stretching forth of the Assyrian monarch's wings, that was to fill the breadth of Emmanuel's land, has that very symbolic meaning to which I have referred, the overspreading of the land by his mighty ones, or host of armed men that the king of Babylon was to bring with him in his overflowing invasion. The knowledge of the way in which the Assyrian monarchs were represented, and of the meaning of their representation, gives additional force to the story of the dream of Cyrus the Great as told by Herodot. Cyrus, says the historian, dreamed that he saw the son of one of his princes, who was at the time in a distant province, with two great wings on his shoulders, the one of which overshadowed Asia and the other Europe, from which he immediately concluded that he was organizing rebellion against him. The symbols of the Babylonians, whose capital Cyrus had taken and to whose power he had succeeded, were entirely familiar to him. And if the wings were the symbols of sovereign power, and the possession of them implied the lordship over the might or the armies of the empire, it is easy to see how very naturally any suspicions of disloyalty affecting the individual in question might take shape in the manner related in the dreams of him who might harbor these suspicions. Now the understanding of this equivocal sense of Baal Aberin can alone explain the remarkable statement of Aristophanes that at the beginning of the world the birds were first created, and then after their creation came the race of the blessed immortal gods. This has been regarded as either an atheistical or nonsensical utterance on the part of the poet, but with a true key applied to the language, it is found to contain an important historical fact. Let it only be borne in mind that the birds, that is, the winged ones, symbolize the lords of the mighty ones, and then the meaning is clear. that men first began to be mighty on the earth, and then that the lords or leaders of these mighty ones were deified. The knowledge of the mystic sense of this symbol accounts also for the origin of the story of Perseus, the son of Jupiter, miraculously born of Danae, who did such wondrous things and who passed from country to country on wings divinely bestowed on him. This equally casts light on the symbolic myths in regard to Bellerophon and the feats which he performed on his winged horse, and their ultimate disastrous issue, how high he mounted in the air and how terrible was his fall, and of Icarus, the son of Daedalus, who flying on wax-cemented wings over the Icarian Sea had his wings melted off through his too near approach to the sun, and so gave his name to the sea where he was supposed to have fallen. The fables all refer to some who trod, or were supposed to have trodden, in the steps of Nimrod, the first lord of the mighty ones, and who in that character was symbolized as equipped with wings. Now it is remarkable that in the passage of Aristophanes, already referred to, that speaks of the birds or the winged ones being produced before the gods, we are informed that he from whom both mighty ones and gods derived their origin was none other than the winged boy Cupid. Aristophanes says that Eros or Cupid produced the birds and gods by mingling all things. This evidently points to the meaning of the name Bel, which signifies at once the mingler and the confounder. This name properly belonged to the father of Nimrod, but as the son was represented as identified with the father, we have evidence that the name descended to the son and others by inheritance. Cupid, the son of Venus, occupied, as will afterwards be proved, in the mystic mythology the very same position as Nin or Ninus, the sun, did to Rhea, the mother of the gods. As Nimrod was unquestionably the first of the mighty ones after the flood, this statement of Aristophanes, that the boy god Cupid, himself a winged one, produced all the birds or winged ones, while occupying the very position of Nin or Ninus, the sun, shows that in this respect also Ninus and Nimrod are identified. While this is the evident meaning of the poet, this also, in a strictly historical point of view, is the conclusion of the historian Apollodorus, for he states that Ninus is Nimrod. And then, in conformity with this identity of Ninus and Nimrod, we find in one of the most celebrated sculptures of ancient Babylon, Ninus and his wife Semiramis represented as actively engaged in the pursuits of the chase, the quiver-bearing Semiramis being a fit companion for the mighty hunter before the Lord.